broad reaction to the proposed government of national unity. We're joined now by anti-apartheid activist Dr. Allan Boesak. Dr. Boesak, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time this evening.
Good evening, Thabo. Good to be back, and good evening to your listeners as well.
If I'm hearing what I'm hearing correctly coming from you, you seem to think a government of national unity didn't work in 1994. It certainly is not going to work now because we don't even have that commonality of reconciliation, be it fake or not, but we don't even have that right now. You would prefer probably a broader coalition, more with the parties on the left. Am I correct?
Yeah, well, in a sense, that is true. I'm not against a government of national unity, although I have been getting the impression more and more that a government of national unity, in the sense that it has been using now, is only a code word for the real coalition between the ANC and the DA. And that, of course, is problematic. A government of national unity, I think, should be built on stronger foundations than the one that we had in 1994. And that failed because there were fundamental issues wrong, I think, with the way we got to that. And so I'm thinking that we have to be very, very careful. We have to have a far wider and far more open and transparent discussion than the ones that we have now, broader than just negotiations, so-called, between political parties. Yeah. I think that civil society has to have a much greater say in trying to give a different direction to these talks and to the way in which we're going than we have been allowed to do thus far.
Do you think there's 8 values, 6 priorities or so that the president would have rattled off after the NEC meeting are lip service, or there's anything to them? Stability, accountability, ethics, integrity, community participation, good governance, constitutional democracy, rule of law. The priorities being jobs, invest in people, defend democracy, the quality of service delivery in health and education, build the industries and safety. That's what they're saying. Let's build this GNU on.
Well, I mean, Thabo, everything that the president has mentioned as the principles that he holds dear are the very principles that have been cast aside, have been trampled upon, that have not been even looked at by the African National Congress, and especially in the last few years. And so I do not believe the president when he speaks about these things. One can say, he says we have to have a different education system. What have they done about that? Not a thing. I don't even want to talk about service delivery and ethical principles. I mean, seriously, I do not know why they are taking the public for fools to say that we can rattle off these things, while the track record that we can see and that we have experienced and that has brought us to this particular point in our history with crisis upon crisis, that we will still believe anything that the president says. And he says it on behalf of his party, or perhaps on behalf of his faction of his party. I don't believe that. I don't think it's enough. I think there needs to be a different discussion. I think we need to test what they mean when they say, let's talk about principles and ethics and morals, for instance. Let's talk about this and that and the other, because talk is no longer enough. And the president, as far as I'm concerned, has lost all credibility as far as everything is concerned.
You reckon he is the weakest link in these negotiations going in, will make the ANC weaker in these negotiations? How so?
Yes, I think so. I think that the ANC, to begin with, the ANC has become such a weak party with such weak leadership that in any case, if they go into this alliance or this government of national unity, as they call it, with the DA as their main partner and all the other parties as hangers-on, then the DA will almost be de facto the government. They will be far more prepared. I mean, we now see all of this information bubbling up from the past, how since 2019 at least, Mozilla has known what exactly is going to be their plan for the 2024 elections. She was even right as far as the numbers are concerned, below 40% or 40% more or less for the African National Congress, 20% more or less for the DA, and that's the plan that they worked on. I find it hard to believe that anybody can be so precise so many years beforehand. And so it seems to me that the DA is mentally, politically and psychologically far better prepared than a factionalized and fractured African National Congress with their weak leadership at the moment. That's number one. Number two, I have spoken about this also in public. We now know that Mr. Ramaphosa is politically a very, very weakened person. He has this dark cloud hanging over him of possible criminal activities that people have been asked and institutions have been asked to investigate. There is Pala Pala that everybody knows about. There is Marikana that nobody seems to talk about, but I think is an important issue that needs to be revisited. What was his role? How did it happen? Whose interest was he representing at that particular point? We've seen the emails, and we know all of that. We know that the DA has written to the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States. Whether they have answered and what they have answered, I do not know. I just know that Mr. Steenhuisen himself has made that announcement. I know that they have been talking and written to SARS about the Pala Pala matter, and that the response of SARS was not completely satisfactory. We also know they have written to the FIC. Now, if you have all of these things hanging over his head and the DA has all the ammunition, it means to me, simply politically speaking, that whatever the president does, he will have to do so by direction of the DA. Otherwise, they could take him to Parliament, and all of these are impeachable offenses. He could be kicked out of that position tomorrow if they bring all of that together and they put that before Parliament. And so he knows that, and the DA knows that. Yeah. And so that, for me, makes him very, very weak and makes him susceptible. But I cannot stand the fact that the president's political and personal weaknesses must make the country hostage to those weaknesses. And we must go into a direction with the Democratic Alliance, which represents everything that we fought against for so long and everything that we thought we had overcome for so long, but then just to wake up to find out now we are willingly jumping in bed with the sons and daughters of our enslavement. That to me is totally, but totally unacceptable. So it seems to me that there would be a lopsided thing anyway, even with those other parties in it, that Democratic Alliance would have the largest say and their political agenda, which includes for me their plan to remain the most effective new colonialist power on the continent, that all of us would now be subjected to that, taking us back to an apartheid era, including secession of the Western Cape and all of those things in those bills that they have now foreseen. It seems to me to be a frightening future for our people if this would happen.
So the Grand Coalition stands the danger, other activists are saying, though genuine the call might be of left parties, that there would be opportunists, there would be rent seekers, there would be corrupt politicians who would jump on the bandwagon and pretend to be left. And we will find ourselves with another anti-poor program.
Well, let me say, the left do not count me amongst themselves, so I cannot speak for them. They must say what they will say. What I'm saying is what I have been thinking, and what I have been thinking I have been testing around the country for the last 6 months or so, as I spoke at invitation of organizations and churches across the country. And I know that the vast majority of our people are desperately unhappy with what is happening now. They are desperately unhappy with a situation where it looks like these elections that could have been a proper and genuine turning point for our people, that these elections will turn out to be just another capture of a few political parties. Now, I'm not saying I'm not condemning politicians all across the board. I'm not condemning all political parties across the board. All I'm saying is that it is possible, as things now stand, to form a coalition government or a government of national unity, whatever you want to call it, with parties that at least have the pretense to stand with our people in our ongoing struggles against neoliberal capitalism, against the international plans that the DA is quite open about, which I fear. I mean, if you go with the DA, it's not just the impact on our people domestically. I think because they are pro-Zionist, that the Palestine question would be off the table forever. I think that our membership of the ICJ would be in jeopardy. I think that our membership of BRICS would be in jeopardy. And whatever good could have come out of that for us and for our people across the world, which find themselves in struggles for freedom and genuine liberation like we are still, that those things could be jeopardized. And to me, that is far too high a price to pay for a quick political solution. And so I'm saying, sit down, work out principles that mean something, which means if people say we cannot trust politicians, then it means that people from civil society, and South Africa has a vast number of people outside of politics who are skilled, who are experienced, who are prepared to sit down and work together with political parties on a set of principles and values that mean something, not values as echoed by politicians who now have to say things that they don't believe in, but want us to believe that they mean what they say. But I mean a broadened, much deepened, different kind of conversation on these negotiations right now, including people who are not inside political parties.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying maybe get the ANC, the IFP, the PA, and whoever else that would get them to form a government, but don't rush this thing and think you will discuss these values and these priorities over the next 7 days. Give them a little bit more time to be ironed out.
Exactly. And not just a little bit more time to consult properly with civil society. I mean, if they want a list of people on economics, if they want a list of people on political thinking, if they want a list of people who can think on religious values and moral values and ethical values, there are such people outside political parties right now. I'm pleading for a kind of mini national convention before we go into final decision making. Okay, we cannot allow political parties on their own to make these decisions for our people. That's the first and most important point that I want to make. And the second most important point is that we must be very, very clear who we are including in this. And including the Democratic Alliance with what it stands for is already a death sentence, not just for the African National Congress in the next few years, because I think if they make this decision, they are even under a darker cloud than I think, or in a deeper bubble than I ever thought they would be. But there are people, as I understand it now from what we see in the media, within the African National Congress leadership, that are raising the flags, that are saying, stop this, let us think about this again. And those people have to be given an opportunity to speak out more publicly. Don't keep this secret. We have no time for secret talks anymore. Not the secret talks that led us into the difficulties of what we have now between 1985 and 1989. Not the secret talks apparently that have been going on between the Cyril Ramaphosa faction and the DA. Not the secret talks that we have now between political parties. No, we have to have an open, frank, honest discussion with our people in ways that we haven't had before. Think differently about the way we enter into this next phase is what I'm saying, Tab.
Dr. Boesak, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on this evening as Dr. Allan Boesak, politician and anti-apartheid activist.